the last few months, a song has been considerably picking up steam in terms of the search for it, and so of course, I'm going to be interested. So let me just check. What type of song is this? AOR. No. No. No, I'm not going to go down that road again. Even if there is a seemingly promising lead every day? Damn it. Damn it. Okay, fine. Case file 0118749. Somewhere in the night.
It's right before your eyes. Somewhere in the night, love's gonna find you.
The investigation into this song started with more questions than normal due to some of the circumstances surrounding it. It had been posted by a user named NeonBlue80, and there was some question if they were gatekeeping. That is, if they knew the title of the song. It was also immediately clear that the sample had been tampered with in some way, almost certainly a pitch shift, with other potential tweaks as well. In fact, even NeonBlue80 seemed to admit the sample was pitch shifted. NeonBlue would also seem to explain that there was a group of people years ago in Lyon, France, that would make recordings to show off incredibly rare songs, and that Somewhere in the Night was one of their attempts to show off a rare track. As the investigation started, we started to rule out numerous tracks called Somewhere in the Night and continued to discuss the pitch shifting and suspected gatekeeping. We also tried to find bands and vocalists that sounded similar, like an obscure AOR band called Wild Blue, with an extremely similar sounding vocalist, Renee Vero. We also discussed potential alternative names for this track, as some believe that if this was a gatekeeping attempt, the title would likely not be in the sample. We also discussed a song called Somewhere in the Night from Tommy Shaw, who perhaps notably was part of the band Styx, and tried to get in contact with him. But Saber soon found the song in question, and he was ruled out. Meanwhile, we also discussed the What's That Song uploader of Somewhere in the Night, Gymforma, and if they were also potentially gatekeeping, as well as being connected to Neon Blue in some way. Then, we discussed another incredibly similar sounding vocalist, Phyllis Rhodes. In fact, she seemingly said that Somewhere in the Night was hers, but couldn't formally release it for some reason. She also interestingly said it had never actually been released, and this lead was both promising but also extremely confusing. And it got more confusing because soon after, Phyllis Rhodes was seemingly revealed to be a hoax. Notice how I said seemingly there? Well, that's because Phyllis being a hoax wasn't a hoax after all. In fact, Bodrick, who solves Everyone Knows That, confirmed, at bare minimum, that we were in fact in contact with Phyllis Rhodes. But when the dust of that whole situation settled, it seemed that it was very unlikely that Phyllis was actually responsible for Somewhere in the Night. Then we got a link from a YouTuber that said they had a slightly longer sample of Somewhere in the Night, and they actually did. It was from a Daily Motion account called Funky Vinyls Records. And yes, that grammatical error is going to drive me crazy. Anyway, this Daily Motion account finally gave us the full sample track list, with everything other than Somewhere in the Night identified. We also quickly figured out the new lyrics, notably the last line of the sample seemingly sounding like "You don't have to run so hard this time, girl," which led some to be convinced that this was in fact a male vocalist. Then we had another similar sounding vocalist found, Mark Scott. And in the case of Lost Wave irony, of course he has a song called Fool in Love. For those unaware, there's a Lost Wave song we call I Was a Fool in Love, notable for being a Googly Elm song, and it's still unsolved. If you'd like a video on the search for it, then let me know in the comments below. Now found another similar sounding artist around this time as well, an artist named Jill Colucci, who also for some reason went by the name Kaylee Adams. Anyway, we continue to discuss approaches for solving the song, including trying to identify the right pitch, as well as looking at some of NeonBlue80's other mixes and seeing if there's any sort of pattern. Then, Nell got in touch with Paulo, who is one of NeonBlue's friends, who answered some questions for us as well as providing some additional context. We found a lead from a band that fit everything we knew about Somewhere in the Night, called Shell in the Ocean, with a song called Love Calls. However, the more we looked at them, the more we thought it probably wasn't them. Then, a Discogs user confirmed Love Calls wasn't the song we were looking for. Azure Blast brought up Renee Vero and Wild Blue again. If you've already forgotten, I don't blame you, but I mentioned them near the beginning of this video. And since we were already looking at previous leads that weren't ruled out, we come back to Mark Scott. He notably had a number of obscure demos. In fact, he had a song called Love Will Find a Way, which seemed like a great potential title. Of course, he also had a song called Right Before Your Eyes, which seemed potentially even more promising. Then, well, things got even weirder when some of the songs credited to rights databases to Mark Scott were on an album released by someone named Scott Free. And it turns out the same artist also seemed to go by Mark Berry. And Berry was Mark Scott's credited middle name in rights databases. So essentially, Mark Scott was also Mark Berry and was also scot-free. Then Neon Blue seemed to tell us that we were way off track through a YouTube comment, and then seemed to flat out tell us that Somewhere in the Night was by an artist named Melanie Ann. But this didn't match the speech pattern of Neon Blue and was fairly clearly a hoax. Meanwhile, we found yet another extremely similar sounding vocalist, Nikki Ryder. It was also about that time that What's That Song original poster Gymforma joined the Found My Mind server and was actually just a really cool guy. And in an almost equally exciting, though possibly disappointing moment, user postalgbv also heard back from Mark Scott, who said Somewhere in the Night wasn't him, though he agreed it sounded like him. We also oddly learned that Neon Blue apparently has a business where he sells USB sticks with rare songs on them, which may contribute to not wanting to share more about Somewhere in the Night. Now also worked with Gymforma to establish more of a timeline for this song, perhaps notably confirming the earliest appearance of the song being from Funky Vinyls Records. Then, get this, we found yet another extremely similar sounding vocalist, Richard Fortune. It turned out that he had over 1,000 songs credited to his name, with many of these songs being by various videos from Playboy. Yeah, you heard that right. And yet again, this lead seemed promising, not only because of the vocal similarity, but because of a musician's rights database entry, in this case a song called Love Will Find a Way. Not only this, but Gymforma was also familiar with Richard Fortune, so he seemed like a very promising lead. Then we seemingly reached out to Richard and heard back from him, with him saying that Somewhere in the Night wasn't his song. While there were some saying that we couldn't be sure this was him, or that he simply might not remember, it did seem to be fairly clear that this was him, and he probably wasn't responsible. This became clear when we confirmed it was in fact Richard Fortune we were talking to. And so, where do we go next? Another similar sounding vocalist, of course, this time Jan Parker Stevens. This is also all of a sudden when a new sample showed up on What's That Song from a new original poster, and while it sounded good, a number of us questioned whether it was AI. This original poster would also act suspiciously and have weird excuses and answers when asked about the sample, so in all likelihood, this was a hoax, especially after another comment on What's That Song from the same original poster seemed, well, questionable at best. And then we found Marcie Free, whose voice sounded extremely familiar. Plus, it turns out she had a bunch of super obscure and rare tracks on her website in the early 2000s. In fact, I reached out to Marcie, as did others, but we never heard back from her. Notably, I found 4 emails from her, all of which bounced. Then we started looking into another similar sounding vocalist, Brett Walker, and it turned out that the producer of Brett's albums was also the producer for Marcie Free, Robin Randall. In fact, Robin herself had put out some music along with her sister Judith, and it too sounded extremely similar to Somewhere in the Night. And Mark Scott started talking with papillionnette and started being just a really cool guy, actually encouraging her to post some of his rare works to her channel, the link to which you'll find in the description below. Then user Alan heard back from Robin Randall, who said Somewhere in the Night wasn't something she'd written or produced, but did agree it sounded like something she could have produced. Also, Gymforma was very helpful and posted a list of songs called Somewhere in the Night that weren't the song we were looking for. User Raynox57 got in touch with Frederick Slama, a renowned AOR expert who I also contacted when we were looking for just a game. Those were the days. Anyway, he sounded extremely similar to him, but he couldn't place it beyond that. Kutsu found, and you'll never believe it, another extremely similar sounding vocalist, Joanna Dean of band Bad Romance. And at this point you have to all be thinking what Murphy was. So many singers have this raspy voice, it's really harder to say this vocalist sounds more similar than any of the others. And things got secular again as we came back to thinking Jill Colucci sounded incredibly similar. Plus, she sung in some movies and TV shows and commercials. Perfect places for something like this to come from. And then user Nell heard back from Alan Jose, wait, hold on a second. Alan Jose, the guy who I thought was impossible to contact and possibly dead? If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch my other videos already. Well, yes, that Alan Jose. It turns out Gymforma actually knows the guy. Sadly, he too doesn't recognize the song. By the way, I'm not even covering some potential sound-alike vocalists like Christina Nichols, Sandy Farina, Nate Tresnick, and more if I did this video with double in length, which the YouTube algorithm usually doesn't like. You know what the algorithm does like? Likes and subscribes. So if you don't mind, it really makes more of a difference than you know, and I'd appreciate it if you could do so. And look at that, I don't even have to awkwardly transition back because yet again it was an extremely similar sounding vocalist, Robert Hart. People were really excited about this guy too, just based on how extremely similar he sounded. It was uncanny. It didn't hurt that he had song titles like Running Out of Time, When Love Is Out of Reach, and The Best Is Still Yet to Come. It's about the time that the majority of the members of the French funk music sharing group I mentioned earlier, a group we call Leon Funk, started showing up on the Find My Mind server and helping us solve many of their own songs. One was a song called You're On Your Own, which wound up being by a group called Voyage, who some of us thought sounded extremely similarly produced to Somewhere in the Night. Then, guess who's joined the search for the song on the server? Yep, Neon Blue 80 himself. It turns out almost all of what we thought we knew about him was misinformation. For one, he definitely didn't seem to be gatekeeping, and he also confirmed that he wasn't the same person as Funky Vinyl's Records. And after a lot of searching and digging, Nell found Funky Vinyl's Records Instagram and Facebook accounts and messaged him, though we have yet to hear back. And user Raynox57 contacted an AOR expert, one of many that not just Raynox, but a number of us have contacted during the search for this song, and this expert swore Somewhere in the Night was probably a demo or obscure release by a band called Wild Blue. Sound familiar? Yep, I brought them up at the beginning of this video, and again in the middle, fronted by vocalist Renee Vero. They've long been a solid lead for Somewhere in the Night, and this just solidified them further. Of course, they also have some super rare and unreleased music, so go figure. Plus, they have some really interesting song names that don't seem to exist anywhere online. And then we found the best, most exciting lead yet, and what's that? I'm actually done. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here, because by tomorrow, we'll have found yet another lead for this song. Until next time, I'm PersonOfDistraction, and I'm now listening to...
You know I've seen that look